All right, so today we got to talk a little bit more about the NDP, schools, bias, all that kind of stuff. This is from Colin Aitchison. He's the press secretary for Alberta's Minister of Education. And he says NDP claim there's no bias in our schools. Alberta parents beg to differ. Just look at this example. An oil and gas working parent came home to his son in tears. His son was taught that anyone who worked in oil and gas was raping the land, according to the NDP. This is 100% okay. Now, this is just terrible. And again, the first thing I wanted to point out is that it doesn't matter what your opinion on oil and gas is. Like, come on. Like, if you want to make that argument, make that argument. But the way that you can tell that these people are just being disingenuous is that they don't encourage people to think critically. They don't do it. Why do they not do that? Because if people thought critically, they would be like, hey, oil and gas isn't perfect, but it's our best option. The whole we can go 100% to wind and solar is a complete and utter pipe dream. It is a total fantasy. And for many reasons. Again, not enough to get into in this video. I mean, the first and obvious one being is that there literally isn't anywhere that has done it. Again, this is the other thing that you point out to these leftists and about Wexit or about a free market and all this kind of stuff, and they always come out. Eventually, you debunk all their arguments, and the last thing they'll point out is, oh well, can you give me an example of your magical free market working or anyone trying it? And I mean, sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. But in the cases of there not being, they'll be like, oh, yep, that means there's evidence of it not working. But when it comes to wind and solar, there's no major country in the world that's 100% wind and solar. I don't even believe that. I think there's one that's anywhere even close. They never take that as an argument for not going towards wind and solar. So again, that's the first thing that whenever people make that argument, number one, it's a confession that you basically have destroyed them. And number two, it's a confession that they literally have no idea what they're talking about, because if they did, they wouldn't have to resort to that. So, um, anyway, that's the first thing I wanted to point out. The next thing I wanted to point out is that the brainwashing aspect. The brainwashing aspect is the big one, in that public schools should not have a. I mean, this is the reason why public schools, they shouldn't. I'm not saying they shouldn't exist, but they should have competition. Is that if they want to do this kind of stuff, then parents should have the right to send their kids to other schools. Like, parents should absolutely have the right to send their kids to other schools. And the fact that they don't, at least in most cases, I mean, in some cases, I mean, there's Catholic schools, but Catholic schools aren't as good as or isn't as good of an alternative as a charter school or a private school. Um, and this is the other thing too about the whole that it's only the rich can afford that and the poor, no, that's complete and utter garbage. If you look at in the states, charter schools, not only do they do a better job, but number two, they're cheaper. And not only that too, you know that they're better and cheaper because if you look at the people who live in these, especially these inner cities in the states, they are almost all desperate to get their kids into charter schools. Why? Because they are better. Again, this is the thing when it comes to the whole public schools thing. This is the thing too. That this isn't even a debate. Again, as much as people think that it's a debate, it's not a debate, because the people that argue, the pro public school people, if they actually thought that public schools were better, they would simply argue, let's have this competition, and the public schools will destroy the competition, and we'll end up right back where we started, with almost exclusively public schools, right? Because if public schools actually are better, then they will destroy charter schools, private schools, any competition in the free market, and we'll end up right back where we started, right? But they never make that argument. Why? Because they know in the back of their heads that public schools aren't as good. I mean, public schools, again, like I've said it a million times, but they really do a terrible job teaching people. And again, the other argument that you know that public schools do it. I mean, there's a couple more arguments I've brought up, but I'll bring them up again for people that are new or didn't watch the last time. Is number one, if public schools did a good job, like a lot of people would have you think, then the government would never have to lobby to increase the minimum wage. Why? Because if public schools do a good job, then the average person coming out of a public school should have no problem getting a $15 an hour job, because that's really not that hard. You don't have to be, and I mean, there's many other reasons why people can't get jobs. Most of it due to the fact that government messes things up for people, but that's not neither here nor there. But again, if public schools do such a great job, then they should release people into the general world at 18 or whatever age you are, with enough skills to bring to the table to where the vast majority, if not almost everybody, should be able to come out of there and get a job making at least 15 bucks an hour. But because they can't, um, it is basically a confession that public schools don't do a good job. Why? Because number one, there's very little incentive for public schools to do a good job because um, what happens when people hear, oh, the kids, test scores down, and all this kind of stuff, that messes things up. And what's the average person's reaction? It's, oh, they must need more money. We got to give teachers a raise. We got to increase taxes. Okay, well then what happens if test scores are going way up and um, all this kind of stuff? Well, what does the average person think? Well, we can probably afford to cut public school funding a little bit. So again, the incentive is almost exclusively for teachers, and this kind of stuff is almost exclusively to not do a good job. Now, I'm not saying most teachers are doing that. I'm just saying that there's a clear incentive to do that. And it may not even be up to the teachers too. Like, as much as I rag on teachers, I know there's a lot of good teachers out there. I'm not saying that all teachers are like that. I'm just saying on average. And again, a lot of it is the people at the top. A lot of it isn't even the teacher. It's the unions, the bureaucrats that are running things. So again, that is the other problem that I wanted to bring up. And again, the other argument would be, um, okay, well, why do kids who are homeschooled, at least in the States, I don't know about Canada, but I mean the States is probably a pretty fair comparison, is if you look at kids who are homeschooled, they score very similar on the SATs to kids who go to public school. So again, if if public school teachers are so good at their jobs and schools are so good at educating people, then why in the world do people with no formal education, at least I would assume most of them, do just as good of a job teaching something as people with 4, 5, 6. I don't even know how many years education some of these people have now to be a teacher. Um, I mean, I think it depends on I know it depends on which school you go to. Some schools have the whole education degree built in, some you got to transfer, so it can depend. So I'm not going to get all caught up on that, but the whole point being is that the entire system is not set up to educate people. The entire system is set up, number one, to make money. And again, this is the other reason why that whenever they make the argument of, oh, well, the private system, all they care about is money. Well, no, all they care about, all they, I mean, the difference being, I mean, the one thing that they point out is that private system has to make money to operate, but the difference being is that the public system can be as terrible as humanly possible and never get shut down. And that is the problem, is that they need competition. The only way that an industry is going to function to the highest degree that it can is if there's competition. It's literally not possible to function at the highest. I mean, again, you take the other example of NASA. I mean, NASA has no competition, but I mean, at least for a while they didn't. But then um, at least no reputable competition, at least if you want to make that argument. But um, then Elon Musk came along and he built, that the one rocket NASA said it would cost like 10 billion and take 10 years to build, and Elon Musk did it for a billion and it took 2 years. Again, so this is the problem with these public sector things, is that when there's no competition, there's literally no incentive to improve. So you need the incentive. Like, I really don't understand people's hiccup. Now, people's hiccup is, number one, they're just brainwashed. They're brainwashed to think, oh, the evil free market. But the other thing too is that the teachers and the unions want to maintain their cushy salaries. Like, again, I've said it before, like, I have no problem with teachers earning, six-figure salaries and having 2, 3, 4 months off during the year. I have no problem with that, under the guise that they're doing it in the free market. When they're doing it under the public's dime, they're literally pointing guns at people and forcing people to pay for something that they don't want. And this is the thing too, that if public schools actually, or sorry, if teachers actually believed that they were worth as much money as they're being paid, especially when you include all the benefits and the time off, then they would be perfectly fine with a private system, or at least a private competition. So again, to sum it all up in a nutshell, I kind of talked mostly about school, but again, the main point here what to get at was the brainwashing part, and that again, I don't know how much more evidence we need of the whole brainwashing part. And again, when one group of people in a certain industry are overwhelmingly lean towards one end of the political spectrum, there is going to be a political bias, and this is why, again, the other argument to bring up is the fact that leftists don't care about diversity. If they cared about diversity, they would care about it when it doesn't benefit them, but they only care about it when it benefits them. And again, for people that don't understand, well, if the left actually cared about diversity, they would be calling for more public school teachers and more university professors to be conservatives, because we know that the overwhelming majority of teachers and professors are on the left, right? So again, if they actually believed in diversity, they would be railing against that. If they actually believed in equality amongst the genders, then they would be railing against the fact that men are like 3 times more likely to commit suicide. Men are like 80% of the homeless. Again, if they actually cared about that, then they would be worried about that, but they don't. They only care about it when it benefits themselves. Again, so I've talked about a lot of things in this video, so I'm going to leave it there. But anyway, if you liked the video, make sure to hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. Check me out on those other platforms. All the links are in the description, so you can find them all there. Um, if you haven't followed me there, make sure you do that, and stay tuned for more.